And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Welcome, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today because, as always, we get in deep talking about defending, explaining the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And I know one of the topics that sometimes is difficult for Catholics to explain to non-Catholics is Mary's Immaculate Conception, that from the first moment of her earthly existence, she was born without the stain of original sin. Is that biblical? Is it in the early church fathers? Well, you know what? Today we're going to focus, and I mean like really focus, on what I think is the most important text you can appeal to for that doctrine, and that is Genesis 3:15. And we're going to take a close look at just that verse, and then we're going to look at how the early church fathers understood that verse and what application it has for the Marian doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. And to help us do that, we're going to have Master Apologist William Albrecht come on the other side of the break, and we're going to dive into Genesis 3:15 and the early church fathers. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Like I said, that's on the other side of the break. On this side of the break, as always, we are going to do our exercises, kind of load up, I should say, our ammo, sharpen our intellect, learn a little bit about the early church, and we do that through the Finding the Fallacy, which, by the way, today's Finding the Fallacy is the cherry-picking fallacy, and also we do that through our Meet the Early Church Fathers segment. Today's early church father is St. Sophronius of Jerusalem. So got great stuff in store for us today indeed. And as always, I want to welcome all of you to the dojo, beginning with those watching live stream. Hi, everybody. Welcome aboard. Also, all of you listening on radio around the country and also via podcast around the world, either through our handy-dandy phone app or through our flagship website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And by the way, like I said, you want to check on virginmostpowerful.org because, after all, it gives you up-to-date info, all the great stuff that Virgin Most Powerful produces, including an upcoming conference. It's the Saxon Honor Conference. It's going to have Dr. Louis Sandoval, Jerry Bellinger, and also Mary Danielle Barber. And that's going to happen. Now, mark your calendars. It's going to happen on August 7th. And you want to check it out. If you can't make it, just go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Go on the homepage. You'll see a banner for this conference. And just click on the banner. It'll give you all the deets. Because if you can, you want to be there live at the Sacred Heart Chapel. That's going to be an amazing time. Some fantastic talks. And of course, they're going to have Holy Hour and also a Vigil Mass as well. And it's also going to be available live stream for those who can't travel. So all that information right there is all bundled up nice and neat on the Virgin Most Powerful's, flagship website. So check it out, folks. And there's a lot of other stuff coming down the stream too. So if you're like me, there are certain websites that I use every day. I would bookmark virginmostpowerfulradio.org and just flip on there every now and then. Keep abreast of all the stuff that's going on because we need to be armed and ready to go to defend the faith, explain the faith, share the faith, grow in holiness, grow closer to Jesus. By the way, if you have any questions for William Albrecht, you can give us a call at 888-526-2151. That is 888-526-2151. Or, if you want, you can always email me. I know for me, I believe it or not, I'm actually kind of a shy guy. I don't really go out of my way, and I don't think I've ever called a radio show as just a listener. I have to be invited as a guest. But I know many of you might be shy like that. You'd much rather shoot an email with a question or a comment or a thought or maybe even a suggestion. I'm always open for suggestions for some upcoming Catholic apologists out there that are starting out and they need a boost to get going in their ministry. I'd love to help them. Just send me an email. The official dojo email address is questions@handsonapologetics.com. All right, so let's go to finding the fallacy for today, which is cherry-picking fallacy. Cherry-picking is a suppression of evidence or a fallacy of incomplete evidence, is the act of pointing to individual cases or data that seem to confirm a particular position while ignoring a significant portion of related and similar cases or data that may contradict that position. So, just like when you go cherry picking or apple picking or whatever, if any of you ever go picking, you want to pick the best fruit, right? You don't want a bucket full of mushy, insect-ridden fruit. You want to pick only the best, right? And that type of motivation occurs in apologetics in a bad way, because cherry-picking fallacy does exactly that. It just picks the evidence that supports whatever you want to prove, and it either ignores or dismisses evidence to the contrary. And that can be very easy to do, especially if you're dealing with something that has a lot of sources, like early church fathers, for example. You can make some broad statements that, or just appeal to a couple of fathers that agree with you and ignore the ones that contradict you. So you want to at least give a hat tip to possible counter evidence, or be very specific about why you're citing the early church fathers to avoid today's finding the fallacy, which is the cherry picking fallacy. All right, so without further ado, why don't we jump to the Meet the Early Church Father segment and meet Sophronius of Jerusalem, who died around AD 638. Sophronius was Patriarch of Jerusalem. He was born in Damascus about the year 560 AD and died at Jerusalem in 638 AD. He is known as Sophronius the Sophist, the later term being in no way derogatory, but simply indicating a teacher of rhetoric. Sophronius was a monk in Egypt about the year 580, afterwards at the Jordan Monastery, and still later at Theodosius in Jerusalem. He was a friend and a companion of John Moschus on a journey to Rome, and it is to Sophronius that Moschus, I guess that's how you pronounce it, I've never seen that name, dedicated a wonderful tribute to him called the Spiritual Meadow. Sophronius carried on as ardent but not very successful campaigner against the heresy known as monothelism, and his death in 638 it was probably hastened by the tragedy of the fall of Jerusalem a few months earlier by the Caliph Omar. And so, yes, he is the champion of orthodoxy against the heresy of monothelism. And by the way, let's talk a little about the synodal letter from Sophronius. It says he was always an ardent Chalcedonian. In other words, he had held to a very orthodox understanding of Christ. Sophronius had traveled already in 633 AD to Alexandria to argue against the monothelite patriarch there, and his mission enjoyed no success. But a few months later, he undertook a similar mission to Sergius, the monothelite patriarch of Constantinople. Upon being made patriarch of Jerusalem in 634 AD, Sophronius immediately drew up a synodal letter in which he explained at considerable length his doctrine of the two energies or operations in Christ, though usually called the synodal letter of Sergius to Sergius of Constantinople. It's probably an open published letter for anyone who wished to read it. Now, I mentioned monothelism a couple of times. It's important to understand what was this heresy. Well, the heresy has to do with Christ's divine and human natures. There was a heresy in which the two natures were so split that Christ was actually seen almost as two persons. And then there's the reaction, which was also radical, where the two natures become so united or closely associated that they were seen as somehow being intermixed into a single nature. And it was that as the background that led to a further question: did Christ have a true human will and a true divine will? Or did he just have one will, one divine will? And this is one of my favorite questions, by the way, whenever I do parish talks and the topic of Christology comes up. I always have people raise their hands to see how many heretics there are. The orthodox and correct answer to that question is that Christ has two wills, a true human will and a true divine will. And, of course, the monothelites, thelos means will, believed in only one will. So Sophronius battled against this heresies, and like Jurgen's Faith of the Early Fathers says, he was not successful in his own right, but nevertheless he did lead very early the charge of orthodoxy on this very important Christological point. And it's time for us to go to the break. But coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to have Master Apologist William Albrecht with us. We're going to talk about Genesis 3:15, the Immaculate Conception, and the Fathers of the Church. Stay tuned.
Here's a great way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Do you have an old car you want to get rid of, motorcycle, RV, or boat? Simply call 855-500-7433, and when they sell that vehicle, a portion of that money comes right back to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. It's an easy way to do it. I want to thank you for it. Call 855-500-7433. God love you and your family.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Michuta. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands on Apologetics. We're going to talk about the Immaculate Conception of Mary and Genesis 3:15. And to help us do that, we have our good friend, Master Apologist William Albrecht with us. William, as you know, has done over 50 live and moderated debates, and he's the purveyor of an excellent website, which is patristicpillars.com. He also is the author of a couple of great books with Father Christian Kops. The Secret History of Transubstantiation, and the definitive guide for solving biblical questions about Mary, Mary among the evangelists. And William, welcome back to Hands on Apologetics.
Gary, I am thrilled to be with you. I was thinking about it earlier, and I was saying this is the fastest hour of the day because we have such an incredible time talking about things that are so important to our faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it just flies, and for good reason, because you make apologetics a lot of fun, and as they say, time flies when you're having fun.
Oh, no doubt, and I would throw that right back at you. I have so much fun talking with you about these really important topics, and indeed, today's topic is a very important one. I think we talk very often, as you know, Gary, about Mary, the Immaculate Conception. What do we mean by that when we say that Mary has an all immaculate nature? The important thing is that it really goes all the way back to the book of Genesis. That's why I think it is so important to really focus on Genesis.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, when I opened the show, I said that, this is Immaculate Conception of Mary is one of those doctrines I think a lot of apologists maybe have a little difficulty with, especially trying to come up with biblical evidence for it. And the thing that you need to focus on, and I know you agree with me, William, Genesis 3:15, that is such an important verse to explain this doctrine, isn't it?
No doubt, Gary. What an important verse. What we have, and we'll read it in a bit, what we have happening in Genesis 3:15, in essence, is what we have defined, actually what the church has defined as the fall. So what happens in the book of Genesis, mankind falls, Adam and Eve in the garden, after disobeying the Lord God. What happens after that then is what has been dubbed a very important moment in salvation history. That is why this part of Genesis 3 is called the first gospel, the proto-evangelium. What do we mean by that? Well, Gary, we really mean something very simple. In fact, let me begin by reading it. Actually, let me begin by letting the audience know what do we mean by Mary being immaculate. And I love going right directly to the Catechism. We look at the Catechism tells us to become the mother of the Savior, Mary was enriched by God with gifts appropriate to her role. Mary was redeemed from the moment of her conception. This is what the dogma of the Immaculate Conception confesses. And Gary, that really is important when we think of Mary redeemed, saved, or justified from the moment of her conception. That would make sense with what we look at and read in Luke 1. When the angel appears to Mary, Mary is already full of grace. Well before Mary carries Christ in her womb, she was already fully justified. Now, where does this really come into play when we talk about Mary having an all immaculate nature? We go to Genesis 3. Incredible how one of the very first areas where the first area in the Bible where we have that amazing messianic prophecy that the Messiah will come is incredible, Gary, because right there with the Messiah foreshadowed, you have his mother as well. So mankind, unfortunately, falls in the garden, and then we read of the curse. So in verse 14, the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all the cattle, and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. So what then happens, Gary, this is very important, we're going to focus on it deeply, is a curse is then put. But not only on the serpent, it is put also on the woman and the man. But we know it's referring to Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. And of course, their seed, as we're told. But verse 15 is a very unique verse. And by the way, even ancient Jewish interpreters recognize it to be messianic. But why is verse 15 important? Because you go from hearing about curses and condemnations to then reading about something amazing. The Lord God will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, singular seed. Her seed is a singular one. He shall bruise her head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, we don't even need to focus on the bruising of the head, the crushing of the head. What we need to really zero in on, because we're not going to look at variant readings of manuscripts, we zero in on this. There is an enmity, meaning a barrier between the woman and the serpent, and of course between her seed and the serpent. But the amazing thing is, what is that enmity? What is that barrier? The Septuagint utilizes multiple Greek words to show it is a kind of mortal warfare between the woman and the devil. Now, here's the amazing thing, Gary. We recognize that woman is the mother of the Messiah. Of course, it can only be referring to one other woman, and that is why we're going to focus on the ancient interpretation of that verse. It can only mean one person, and that was a mother. That is a mother of the Messiah. And I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Gary. If what we are saying about Mary having an all-immaculate nature is, in essence, we're simply saying Mary was never under the dominion of the devil. The devil's clutches never had a grasp on Mary. That would make complete sense if Mary is said to be at enmity with the devil in the very same vein as her son. Now, we recognize that Christ, the Messiah, is sinless by nature, but we recognize Mary's sinless nature comes from grace. And this verse 15 is a very significant one because there's so much going on there, isn't it? What are your thoughts on that, Gary?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the New Testament, to be friends with the world is to be at enmity with God. He actually uses that word enmity. And so it's either one or the other. Either you're in God's friendship or God's grace and you're at enmity with the devil, or vice versa. There's no middle ground. You can't be friends with both sides. And so when God says he's going to put the enmity, between the woman and the serpent, that absolutely. That means that the woman's not in any way, shape, or form under the dominion of the devil. And I think you can even go further, say, of course, she's sinless because the sin wouldn't be to be friends with the devil, right?
Yep.
And also that he doesn't have any claim on her. So, I mean, that points to the presence of sanctifying grace.
Very, very great point there, Gary. You're 100% correct. And I think the other area that is so important to really examine is if we look at, people kind of focus very, very much in verse 15, which is great. But if you rewind it a little bit to verse 14, and then the following after 15 and onward, you read multiple times a particular word utilized for cursed. So the amazing thing is that the woman of verse 15 is not under any kind of curse. Now, we know very much, Gary, what do we mean by curse? We read it over and over. The curse in Satan, and then the curse to Adam, the curse of the consequences of the fall. The woman in verse 15, there is no such curse that would befall her. And exactly what the ancient church has said from the beginning is what is shown to us in Genesis 3:15. That woman, that female, that mother of the Messiah, is not under that curse. That curse is original sin that would be passed on to all the seed of humanity. And the incredible thing is, Gary, it does make complete sense that later we arrive at the Gospel of Luke and the angels greeting to Mary, "Hail, full of grace," or having been filled with grace, which would be a valid way of interpreting it as well, is very clear. If before the angel even appeared, Mary was in possession, as you point out, of the sanctifying grace, and I love that kind of language, because what do we mean by sanctifying grace? We grow in sanctification, we grow in justification. Mary was already justified when the angel appeared to her, and the only thing that could make sense was her having that all immaculate nature. And it completely makes sense when we compare it to many other passages, even though today we're focusing on Genesis 3. There's so much theology that can really be taken from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always like to think of, Eve before the fall and Adam before the fall, right? They're both in fellowship with God, and in a sense, they're both at enmity with the devil. And then the fall occurs right before Genesis 3:15, and that switches where they become friends with the devil. They join his rebellion, and they are at enmity with God. Then God comes and promises he's going to reverse it back to how it was in the beginning, right?
Yeah. No doubt. What a great point, Gary, because really for people that believe that that the God of the Old Testament was some kind of a tyrant, which is an unfortunate way that modern day liberal scholars look at it, they don't realize the incredible love of our Lord God, the graciousness he had towards us, is that immediately there is this promise of this reversal, this amazing mother of the Messiah and Messiah. It really is incredible, everything going on there. Looking at Genesis 3, we're very clearly told, for people wondering, well, who is that serpent? Well, what we have in Genesis 3 happening is you've got the serpent seed, the woman and the woman's seed. It's very clear that Genesis 3 is talking about the devil. And how do we know that? Well, I always, for the audience may be wondering, I always try to put a deuterocanonical book in for my brother Gary here. and Gary probably knows where I'm going. Wisdom 2:24 is very clear. It identifies that serpent as the devil. We're told, but through the devil's envy, death entered the world, and those who belong to his company experienced it. So that really is incredible, an amazing kind of theology put forth there. Death entered because of the devil. So the serpent of Genesis 3, if anybody were to try and say, well, where's the proof that it's the devil? The Old Testament itself tells us that it's the devil. And the book of Revelations shows us that the seed of the serpent are the demons. And the woman we know very clearly, she is the mother of the seed. The only possible person it could be is the mother of the Messiah, our Immaculate Mother. So there is a lot that we can get from there, Gary, when we dialogue with our Eastern brothers and sisters, and even our Protestant brothers and sisters. We can tell them, look, this is why we believe Mary was born, was created with an all immaculate nature. It is all by the grace of God, and we hearken right back to the beginning, and that really is incredible, Gary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, William, whenever someone asks me why I believe in the Immaculate Conception, I say it's because Catholics, we believe in Bible prophecy, right?
Yeah, no
doubt. A prophecy right there in Genesis 3:15. And, of course, that prophesies about Christ crushing the head of the serpent, Christ being at total enmity with the serpent, right? And then it's like, well, it also prophesies about his mother.
Yeah, and that is a really incredible point there, Gary. Early on, this incredible messianic prophecy, but also this very Marian prophecy so early in the Bible as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're chatting with William Albrecht, the purveyor of patristicpillars.com. More to come on the other side of the break. Stay tuned.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
This is a catechetical minute from Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Just as the gestation of our first birth took place in water, so the water of baptism truly signifies that our birth in the divine life is given to us in the Holy Spirit. Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 694. The most basic elements of human life are often the actual tools that God uses in our relationship with Him. Water is one such element God has used, from the flood, to the Red Sea, to the Jordan River. Father, you have made all things with this in mind. May we recognize these signs of your love in creation.
This has been a catechetical minute from Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Michuta on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics, and we are chatting with Master Apologist William Albrecht about the Immaculate Conception, Genesis 3:15, and the Fathers. And William, yeah, boy, great way to look and analyze the first good news about Christ, Genesis 3:15. Is there any other area you want to explore before we begin to move on from there?
Yeah, before we get to the fathers, Gary, I know people tend to really wonder, okay, well, what do you all mean by Mary being justified in Luke 1? I want people to recognize when we talk about justification, Gary made the best point when he said Mary was sanctified. She was fully holy when the angel appeared to her. That is why the greeting is such an incredibly significant one. But we then get told, well, you can find the very same Greek word in the letter to the Ephesians. We want to be clear. You can find the root word is the same. It's a different Greek word. But the amazing thing that you find in the book of Ephesians is it talks about that grace that we all should have had from the very beginning, had we not fallen in the garden, had Adam and Eve not fallen. And Mary is in possession of that when the angel appears to her. It's amazing how the book of Ephesians affirms even more so what we were saying about our Immaculate Mother. So really, I want to make that point there, Gary. That's a very important point. And remember, for the audience that are wondering what we're talking about when we talk about the book of Revelation, in Revelation 12, we have an image of a woman in heaven. The amazing thing happening here is, you know very well, Gary, is the devil is after that woman. Satan is after her, trying to destroy the child and destroy her. But even furthermore, we find in Revelation 12, she never falls under the grasp of Satan. Satan never gets her in his clutches. It lines up perfectly with the theology put forth in Genesis 3. And that is why, Gary, I think the thing that I think is so important that tends to really get minimized by people that are not Catholic, and maybe Catholics don't recognize the massive amount of early fathers that, whereas not all of them decided to delve into it and say, okay, well, Mary had an all-immaculate nature because of this. No, because a lot of the fathers were not writing about that particular point. But the massive consensus of fathers that interpreted Genesis 3 and viewed the woman as the mother of the Messiah is overwhelming, Gary. And I think it is one point that we need to really, really examine.
Yeah, and that's, William, that's a very, very important point because, if the topic of original sin doesn't really come up in the early church fathers, at least not till fairly late, although they might incidentally touch on something like that. So if you're looking for some specific, declaration of Mary being immaculately conceived, you won't find it. But you do find extremely early testimony where they understood Genesis 3:15 as pertaining not only to Christ, but also to Mary as well.
Without a doubt, Gary, and incredible how this really goes hand in hand with Mary as a new Eve. It really does go hand in hand. And we find it very early on, Gary, around 120 AD. We look at a document called the Epistle to Diognetus, or Mathetes. But what we have here, Gary, is very significant because this is what is called an apostolic era writing, which even if we're not exactly certain the name of the author, what we do know is you open up any volume of the apostolic fathers and you find the Epistle to Diogenes there. But what we also find here, so significant, we read, when this is the tree you cultivate and this the fruit you pluck, you will always harvest the blessings desirable in the sight of God, blessings which no serpent can touch. And then we have the important language. No deceit defiled by its contact. And you brought up a great point, Gary. Even though a lot of the fathers early on do not go into the language of really breaking down what original sin is, you can find that kernel of teaching early on. And we read, no deceit defiled by its contact. And then here we have a very early testimony of Mary as New Eve. Mary literally being called a virgin that can be trusted. We read, then Eve is not seduced. On the contrary, a virgin can be trusted. It is talking clearly about Mary. She is that virgin that can be trusted. It cannot be Eve because Eve was seduced. Eve was tricked in the garden, and Eve did fall. But the contrary to that is the virgin that can be trusted, which is Mary. Now, this is amazing when we look at the actual Greek of it, Gary, to look at the fact that no deceit, no defilement could touch this individual because the virgin can be trusted. It then later on we'll see how that development of doctrine happens when we realize the fathers are then begin to say, okay, look, we're going to expound on Genesis 3 even more and look at what this means for the faith. And I think that that is incredible, Gary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And and very well put, too, because it's amazing how much information you can dive into, and especially so early, too, William. I mean, you're talking to apostolic fathers already, tying Mary and Jesus to this first gospel.
No doubt. You've got an apostolic father there, Gary, which is really amazing. And as we go on, we're going to find more and more fathers that even though people are going to wonder, okay, well, I wish that father would have really gone into detail about more things, we need to realize one thing. A lot of the early fathers, such as the Epistle to Diogenes, and we're going to look at Justin the Martyr, we'll look at St. Irenaeus of Lyon, a lot of them, their point was to try to show people that Mary was the new Eve. You'll definitely find it later on when we run into fathers like Hippolytus of Rome, Ephraim the Syrian, Gregory the Wonder Worker, who then they do go a further step and they'll then say, okay, well, what do we mean by all of this? We mean that Mary was created without any sin. You'll find that Ephraim, as we'll see later, says that Mary has no stain. Now, again, we're being very fair with everything. If we want to show that this stain is in reference to original sin, we have to connect that to Genesis 3, and we will do that later. Mm-hmm. But before we do that, Justin the Martyr, as people may wonder, the reason we have such an amazing faith, Gary, some of these incredible saints that came before us that went to their death willing to die for the Catholic faith that they know Christ established. Justin the Martyr, as you know, Gary, we don't know his last name. He died a martyr, an incredible saint of the early church. And as you know very well, in his dialogue with Triphob, he tells us, Eve was a virgin and incorrupt. The word of the serpent having been conceived, she gave birth to disobedience and death. Mary, however, the virgin, when she had given birth to faith and joy, gave this answer to the angel Gabriel, who brought the good news, namely that the Holy Ghost would come upon her and the power of the Most High would overshadow her, and therefore the Holy One would be born of her and would be the Son of God. And then he then quotes, be it done to me according to your word. The incredible theology brought forth here, Gary, is that not only is Mary the complete opposite of Eve, but Mary, just like the Epistle to Diogenes tells us, Mary is that new Eve. She was not deceived. She didn't give birth to disobedience and death. Rather, she gave birth to the author of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And And again, for that typology to work, I mean, it would have to be Eve before the fall, right? Because that's exactly the difference between Eve and Mary is Eve was created immaculate and then became a sinner through the lie of the serpent. But Mary was created immaculate and she remained faithful.
Oh, yeah, no doubt, Gary. And that will be a theme that we find very often in the Fathers. I mean, we've already read two. We're about to read a third one. And the incredible thing, Gary, we have not even left the 100s. We are at a very early period in church history. And indeed, the great Bishop of Lyon, Irenaeus, St. Irenaeus says, he put enmity between the serpent and the woman, together with her offspring, that they observe each other. The one, the sole of whose foot would be bitten, would have the power to trample on the head of his enemy. The other would bite and kill and hinder the steps of man until the predestined offspring or seed, who was a child of Mary, would come to trample on his head. So what we have here, even in Irenaeus, and by the way, for people wondering, we have a ton in Irenaeus that we can read, but this one area is sufficient to show that even the great Bishop of Lyon recognized our Immaculate Mother to have been that woman of Genesis 3. That is why we can fast forward to the time of the great Cyril of Jerusalem, Saint Cyril of Jerusalem, as you know, Gary, the author of the Catechetical Lectures, very, very, very famous set of lectures that were for new catechumens coming into the faith, and even those that were well established that were learning about the faith. Look at what he tells us, the very point that you expounded upon, Gary. He says in Catechetical Lecture 12, through the Virgin Eve, death entered. It behooved that through a virgin, or rather from a virgin, life should come forth, so that just as the serpent deceived the former, so Gabriel should bring the glad message to the latter. Gary, yet again, we have Mary being presented as that new Eve. What incredible theology we've found, and we've read multiple fathers already, and we have not even gotten close to the end of the patristic era. And that to me tells me a lot, Gary, because we're going to rewind later on. Right now we're reading very important fathers. You know, we're looking at Latin fathers, we're looking at Greek fathers, and it tells us that no matter where we're going on in the globe, in the world, they're all teaching this very same thing: Mary as the new Eve.
Yeah, very good. And that is so important. And again, it's not your typical Catholic apologetic, is it, William? I mean, you're not like looking for quotes where they talk about Mary not having the stain of original sin, but rather, you know, by looking at how the early fathers use Scripture, you know, you can demonstrate essentially the same thing. We're chatting with Master Apologist William Albrecht about the Immaculate Conception and Genesis 3:15. More to come after the break. Stay tuned, folks.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
Logan, what has Virgin Most Powerful Radio done for you?
Well, Virgin Most Powerful Radio, I got to say, I've been a listener for about a year now, and it's really helped me grow closer to my faith and the fact that I'm listening and I'm getting unsugar-coated, clear, charity with clarity Catholicism. And it has really helped me even, grow so much deeper in my faith as a young man and discern the priesthood and have a love for Jesus Christ. And this is so seen on the Terry and Jesse show on Virgin Most Powerful, the unsugar-coated, clear truth of our Catholic faith that is so lacking today. It's almost like the Terry and Jesse show. It's the orange juice Catholicism. It's filling things up. I just need to give them a shout-out, my praise, grace. I'm just so appreciative. It's just really helped me, and I know people want to hear this. It inspires me to want to speak it, and it inspires me to even go as far as discerning the priesthood, to think I should speak this. We need to stand up for our beautiful faith. This is the unsugar-coated beauty, and this is just what I've seen on the Terry and Jesse show. I encourage so many listeners to start donating and support this cause. It has just truly impacted my life, and all I just want to give is some praise to it.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Michuta. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Master Apologist William Albrecht about the Immaculate Conception, Genesis 3:15, and we're looking at the early church fathers. And yeah, William, man, and these are so early fathers too. I mean, you're not getting into 4th, 5th, 6th centuries, right? You're still in the 2nd century.
No doubt, Gary. Very, very early fathers, and like I'm telling the audience for them to realize, later on, God willing, we'll do another one, and we're going to rewind to even, we'll go look at the 100s, 200s, 300s, and when you think we've gone further, we'll hop right back to the 300s. The point of doing that, Gary, is to show that chain of belief in the Latin church, in the Greek, in the Syriac, wherever you look, you find them teaching the very same thing. And the one thing that I remember when undertaking this study, Gary, we've heard very often how Mary was the new Eve, but the one thing, because clearly biblical, the one thing that really blew me away was the massive amount of fathers who looked at it and, they saw that very same thing. Gregory of Nyssa. And I want to be very clear for the audience that are tuning in. The names you've read, Cyril of Jerusalem, St. Irenaeus of Lyon, Justin the Martyr, Epistle to Diognetus, these are major patristic writings, major patristic figures. These are massive. These are very, very important church fathers. They are not any, we're not reading about, a figure that maybe wrote only one work that we've never heard of before. In the Epistle to Diognetus, of course, it's only one work. It's meant to be one work. But the other fathers wrote voluminous works because they're patristic figures. And what is incredible about them, Gary, in the other works they write, they're defending Christology to its core. Irenaeus of Lyon, Gregory of Nyssa, one of the great fathers that defended the Trinity, who we're about to read what he wrote about Mary. These are very important figures, and look at what they say about Mary. Gregory says, "For since Eve introduced death into nature through sin, was condemned to bring forth in pain and labor, it was by all means that the mother of life should begin conception in joy, as well as complete the birth in joy. For the archangel said to her, 'Rejoice, full of grace. By that greeting he took away the sorrow that was in the beginning, called down upon childbearing because of the sin.'" Now here's the amazing thing, Gary. We look at the language. Gregory is telling us Eve was condemned to bring forth in pain and labor. Now, if we go to the book of Genesis, that is one of the many curses that we read about earlier. The curse of bringing forth in pain and labor. The curse of toiling in the ground, as we're told that Adam and his seed would receive. This is one of the curses. And Gregory of Nyssa is very clear. The mother of life, rather, gave birth in complete joy. That curse Mary was not under. And I think when we read that, sometimes we don't recognize it, but that is filled with amazing theology there, Gary.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really interesting take on that passage too.
Yeah.
So again, if Adam and Eve didn't sin, there wouldn't be that. Well, the text isn't quite clear. It's whether an increase in pain or whether pain itself. But nevertheless, again, Mary's being described like Eve had she not fallen.
Yep, no doubt. That is a really, really good point. So I think that it's very clear. I mean, of course, I'm open to hearing other people's opinions, but I think that the curse was an increase, which really, when we look at what Gregory is saying, he's saying that the archangel told her, "Rejoice, full of grace." By that greeting, he took away the sorrow. So that is amazing. That increase. I agree with you, Gary. I think that's a better. I mean, I think that's a probable reading, at least. And we can even find that furthermore in Gregory, where Gregory, even in another area, writes, he says, the greeting, full of grace to Mary, he says, is contrary to the words heard by the first woman. For then that one, talking about Eve, was condemned to pain because of sin. But now in this one, in Mary, pain is driven out by joy. So whether we talk about this being an increase in pain or what have you, Gregory's very clear. There's a condemnation Eve was under. Why? Because of sin. But that condemnation Mary is not under. And what is a logical conclusion? If she's full of grace, if she's not under that condemnation, if she's not going to have a painful birth, if that has been driven out of her, and it is only a joyous and a happy birth, complete with joy, then that tells you very clearly she is not under that condemnation. And Gregory couldn't be any clearer, as in multiple areas he brings that out, Gary.
Yeah, and this is all part of another stream, I guess you could say, small T tradition that when Mary gave birth to Christ, that it was done without pain.
Yeah, no doubt. That I agree with you. Definitely tiny T there, but we find a lot of fathers really putting that forth there, Gary. I would define that as a pious belief, a pious traditional belief, but definitely nothing that the church has bound us to believe. But either which way, the fact that we're looking at the early church, we're in a very early period in church history. As you pointed out, Gary, we haven't even gotten to the 400s yet. And we're in such an early period, and we have fathers clearly bringing this theology out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just fascinating. And I know one resource that you love and I love, which I think you can still get on used bookstores, is The First Gospel by Dominic Unger.
That is a great one. Yeah, no doubt, Gary. In fact, I'm utilizing the notes directly from there.
Okay.
The very first gospel from correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to be disrespectful. I believe it's Father Dominic Unger, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Great word. And the reason I recommend people get that work, Gary, is very, very simple. If people get that work, you're going to find a massive, voluminous amount of fathers from the very beginning all the way to the medieval era and beyond that show you that unbroken chain that unbroken chain that shows that they were interpreting that woman of Genesis 3 as Mary, the mother of the Messiah. And as we've noted, we have not even gotten into the 400s, and we've been reading about amazing figures in church history.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I've read and reread that section, I don't know how many times. And it's not a very long book, but the entire book is nothing but focused on that verse. And the beautiful thing is, as you read through these passages, William, I know you realize it too. It's like you can see things that are there implicitly in the early church fathers, the earliest ones, I mean, really early, that are made explicit in later writings where they expound on it. And it's all, like you said, part of that same stream or the same fabric.
Very true, Gary. And what we will note later, as in another show, we'll note how you get to the point in church history, like you do in Ephraim and in Proclus of Constantinople and other figures, you get to the point where they begin tying in Genesis 3 with Mary, the mother of the Messiah and the Messiah, and they then realize, okay, well, what is this saying about Mary and the way she was created and the fact that she was never under the dominion of the devil? What is it saying? And they then expound more and more upon it. And as you know very well, Gary, eventually we get a clearer picture of what is happening there in Genesis 3.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just picking on the Immaculate Conception, right, William? I mean, there's actually a whole bunch of other Marian doctrines that are kind of embedded in that same prophecy.
They sure are, Gary. We've got Mary, Mary, Mother of God here. We have the Immaculate Conception here. We have Mary. There's just so much. I'm trying to think of everything that we find
Virgin
here.
birth, maybe?
The virgin birth as well. I mean, there's
co-redemptrix.
Co-redemptrix.
Yeah, I mean, you could go on.
Mediatrix of all graces. I mean, you could go on and on. I mean, it's really, really incredible what you can find directly here in Genesis 3. And again, Gary, we're not reading anything into it. We're looking. We went earlier, line by line. We read Genesis 3. We said, okay, what kind of language is being utilized here? We broke it down, and then we moved on to the earliest writers. And indeed, one that I love reading, Gary, is Amphilochius, Bishop of Iconium. Mm-hmm. Saint Amphilochius, he tells us in his orations, the world, which had previously fallen under sin by a virgin, was set free by a virgin. By a virginal birth, so many and so great forces of invisible demons were precipitated into hell. Here's the amazing theology. Yet again, a virgin that fell introduced sin into the world. But then Mary, here's amazing theology. We find it as early as St. Irenaeus of Lyon. Mary is that untier of knots. That indeed, that is one of the amazing titles that Mary has. The untier of knots. Well, we don't only find it there. We find it in many fathers. Amphilochius, another one. The world was set free by a virgin. That is the untying of that sin introduced into the world by a virgin. And we know it's talking about Eve. But Mary is that new Eve. Even that theology is brought forth in Genesis 3. Mary, the new Eve. So the amazing thing, Gary, and I always say it, is if we can find in the book of Genesis 3, which no Christian is going to disagree, a very clear messianic prophecy, and the mother of the Messiah right there, what does that tell us? That tells us that mother is a very important figure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, William, you know what? Guess what I'm going to say next?
Gary, the time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah, my friend, I tell you. You know, we do have a little bit of time. Why don't you tell us where people can get a hold of your books?
Yeah, they can go, they can find them on EW10 if that's where they want to go. They can also go to Amazon where they can find them there. Definitely they can check out either which area there. And check out what I'm doing over at Patristic Pillars. They can find me as well on YouTube. Just put William Albrecht there. And check out the channel that we run, Gary and myself together, the Apocrypha Apocalypse. If you haven't subbed yet, go over there and do it now. A lot of really fun things that we have that we're working on there. And hey, anything that I have going down the line later on in the future, I will appear here and let the people know.
Awesome. Well, hey, William, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Look forward to being back.
All right. William Albrecht, patristicpillars.com. And, man, it did fly. It's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the dojo lights. Thank you so much for listening. Coming up next, the Terry and Jesse Show, High Impact Catholic Talk. And, God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for listening.